Right, so we're back, and as promised, we're going to start combining these two masks that we've already made. Having given it some thought, I think we might as well start doing this on what will eventually become our, what I'm calling wet rocks graph. So let's make a new graph, new substance, except this time we are going to use the PBR setup because this is ultimately going to be our final product, and we'll call it wet rocks. Okay. We're not really going to use a bunch of these nodes right now, but what we are going to do is we're going to take a look in our library, and we're going to pull out the two maps that we've already made. Now we want to pull out the yellow one. We want to pull out the non-compiled graph, so just the regular old graph. And so this is our ledge. This is going to be our landmass. And here we have our two masks. We have mask mid and we have mask low, mask high low. So what we did was we took this gigantic mess of stuff up here, these two things, and we have now condensed them down to these two teeny weeny little nodes. So that makes life a lot easier. Now, for now, we're going to take a look and see how these things interact with each other. So for the moment, I'm going to bring out, so I was thinking, what's the sort of most efficient way of showing all this? I'm going to bring out these three colors, and I'm going to assign them, just different different shades of gray. I'm going to keep them as color for now, just make my life easier. But they're distinctive, right? So these are now going to correspond to well, eventually they will turn into the three maps that we have. So let's pull out a blend, and let's see how these masks interact with each other. So the first one is, we're going to go with high-low, because high-low is the mask that deals with, well, it's the one that I had on the bottom. It really doesn't matter how I mean, it does if you want it to look kind of like mine, but I arbitrarily picked one for one and the other for the other, so honestly it doesn't really make that much of a difference. And then we're going to plug two colors in here. So this top color is coming in as one of the materials, and it is being masked. So this top color is corresponding to the white down here, and what's coming through that bottom, what's coming through those holes, if you will, is this second color here. So each one of these will get assigned eventually, instead of being a color, it will be a material. Now that's only two out of the three, so we're going to need another blend in here, and we're going to make this go on top. We're going to put our third material down here, and then we're going to get, as our mask, we're going to get our mid mask from here. So this is our second mask. Doesn't want to go. Okay, it's our second mask from in there. So now we have a situation where we have these two masks interacting with three colors. because we are taking this and we are running it through this second mask. So that's where we're getting the third color from. What we can also do, because we put those parameters in here, oh, I capitalized one of those R's. It's making a separate, made a separate group for it. So we can now start, this is so frustrating when I don't have two screens. Let's take a look at this. So we're now looking at the end result of that blend. And now we can come back here. I single clicked on that one. And so I'm rotating now the maps, and I'm seeing, oh no, that's not what I want to do. It's my mid rotation. So I can rotate and you're getting different patterns within the rock. And then what we're going to do, now this is just a bunch of blobs moving. It's not really going to make sense until we do another blend where we're now using that ledge mask that we made, which defines our land masses. Now all of a sudden we can see, let's just, again, this will be our water, so let's just make that blue. Maybe not quite such a nasty blue or blinding blue. And so this now starts to give us an idea of what our various zones are going to look like. So since we have a color assigned to each one, we can start thinking about, well, how do I want this to look? Because all of a sudden it makes it visually more easy to sort of start dealing with, how's the overall thing going to look? So let's maybe set it up. That's really frustrating. Let's maybe set it up in such a way that we might want to make it permanent, or we might want to, again, decide to expose these things so that the end user can make these decisions for themselves. I kind of like that. So I'm going to leave it like that for now. And we can decide later on whether or not we want to switch those around anymore in the actual engine. So let's save this now. And then we're going to go back to starting to make more maps now for our materials. But this gives us an idea of now where we're going to plug those in. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to call it Wet Rocks. I'm going to just make a new folder for composite materials. There should be an E in there. And we can save it in there. Okay. So now let's make a new graph. And now we're going to start making the actual rock sort of surfacey surfaces. So let's start with the cracks. And again, I'm going to go back to making it empty here. Right, now this one is actually going to have 3 outputs. We have let's zoom in on that. We have a depth map. We have a crack mask, and we have a grain mask, because we're going to want information for the color and for the for the normal. So we want both the deep cracks and we want the shallower information. We kind of want to separate it out. So that's why we're going to have 3 here. What's this? Oh, we don't need this. And let's go back to this one here. Okay. So we're going to add 3 output nodes. I'm going to copy, I'm going to paste, I'm going to paste. So one of them, well, 2 of them are going to be masks. So we're going to call this crack mask. And that will be a mask. And this one, while we're down here, we're also going to make a mask. And this one we are going to call grain mask. And if you forget to put that underscore in there, it'll take care of it for you. And then this final one will be our depth map, well, which is essentially a height map. So why don't we just call it height? It's going to correspond to, I end up calling the height of the actual rocks in the main graph to differentiate between sort of the height of the overall rock versus the height of the design, and I call that depth. So that kind of corresponded to that. So just height. But if we go ahead and use this later on for something else, that calling this depth would be confusing, so I'm going to call it height. And in here, it will indeed be a height map. Okay. So the noise that I ended up using for this one was cells 3. Oops, there's some space in there. There we go. Now, unlike the sort of broader landform maps we were making earlier, I want these guys to be much more high resolution. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to my favorites, and I'm going to get a noise upscale. And I'm going to ramp this up to, just going to copy it and just paste it out. Paste it out again. And now we have it up to 2048. Which is way too small for what we want going on in here. So rather than, I want that, what I ended up using, I mean, again, we can expose this, but the distance I ended up having is 4. So this makes for a much bigger design, which as we upscale it, gets progressively tighter and tighter. And we can, in fact, I ended up not exposing this, but we can expose it, and I think we should, because again, if we're planning on, 4 was what worked, I felt, for this particular environment. But if we're going to be, again, reusing it later on, that's probably something that I'm going to, let's do that, because it'll make it more utile later on. So once we've done this, we kind of want to make the design more bold. So I'm going to bring in a levels, and I'm going to tighten up the contrast on this. Okay, kind of get it. Let's keep going this direction. So, we want to be able to see these things. And again, I don't want to go too crazy with it, because it's never going to completely get to be the way I want. So again, I'm going to not go too far with this, but I'm going to use that multiply it by itself trick here as well. And that's going to give me a bit more oomph. And then let's blur it out a bit to make it not quite so harsh. Maybe not to the point where you can't see it at all, but something much more subtle. It's too much, so we can always change it later. Okay, let me take a look at my notes for a second. Yeah, I wanted to see exactly what I did in here. All right, so I'm bringing in other levels in here. This is going to be the, I'm actually going to expose this one, at least partially, in order to, this is what I'm going to call the crack depth. So this is going to give me a height map for the cracks, because it's going to exclude, there's going to be a normal map on top of here, but the only thing that's really going to get a height map are these cracks in between those various sort of little bits of rock. So what I'm going to try to do with this levels is even out the sort of, yeah, kind of bring that up a little bit, so I'm getting more information, like it's more dark, and then like that. And then I'm going to expose this one, my mid-range, so that as it moves up and down, my height map then becomes determined by this. So I might want to bring that up a little bit more. And this is going to be kind of my range here. You can block it off too. You can clamp it if you don't want people to go all the way. So I think that'll work. So we're going to call that crack depth. Let's go ahead and expose that. Now let's make an input parameter for crack depth. I'm going to call that depth and crack. And then I had the default set at 0.597, but the rest of the levels were different. You know, obviously I'm not copying all the numbers that I had in the previous one. But again, you know, this is going to be something that we're going to be able to adjust in the engine. So it's not that big a deal. Let's see what that looks like once we... So in order to expose these things in levels, you go to values, and then instead of a histogram, you actually have these guys as sliders instead of the graph, and then at the slider you can expose the slider. So there we go. I put a sharpness in here. Again, I don't remember why, but since it stayed in my notes, there must be some sort of reason. It was set very low. I think it was to do with the edges not sloping so much, but I had it set at 0.3. Yeah, you know, it's once you're doing that, it's kind of hard to tell with the naked eye what's going on. So this ends up being our height map, which is adjustable here. And then in the histogram, once you've exposed this parameter, you can't move it, just like you can't move it here. because it just goes away. When you're in the histogram, it goes red and you can't move it. And that's how you know it's exposed. All right. Now, we've made this, but this isn't really, because we can adjust this to gray it out, it doesn't make a good mask. So we really want one of those. And so what we're going to do is, I mean, we want it to be off of this one because this is our final one. So I'm just going to bring in a levels, and we're just going to adjust that so it's black and white. And we're going to adjust it so it's super duper contrasty. Something, you know, something that's going to make a suitable mask. So that's pretty good. So we're going to call this one, which one is this? Crack mask. There we go. That's going to be that. And now all we need to do is to make the grain mask. And let me take a look at my notes, see what I had for my noise. Black and white spots 1. So I'm going to type in spots, and it is spots 1. And again, I'm going to kind of do the same thing. I'm going to upscale this so it ends up being a 2K map. So I'm going to copy, paste, paste. And we will attach all these guys together. And that ends up being my noise mask. I'm not going to put a blur, I'm not going to put anything. And I'm going to actually end up using this as kind of my default sort of ground graininess. What I ended up doing was using it for a couple of the other rocks, just, you know, for things like normals and color variation and stuff like that. So it's upscaled to what we need it to be. And there we go. So, oh yeah, you know what we were going to do? We were going to expose this as well. So let's make another parameter for this. And we're going to call it crack size, I guess. And we'll have the default as 4. And you can't, well, you don't want it to, let's make it 10. And that should be fine, and we will put it onto distance here. So we will, oh, it needs to be an integer. Hold on a second. So let's go back. Instead of having it a float, we're going to call it an integer. And now that should work. There we go. Okay. So let's save it. And we're going to call it cracks, except we're going to put it into ground. And then we can also publish it to ground. And yeah, you know, let's take a bit of extra time and take a look at now. Let's maybe replace one of these temporaries that we have in here with the material that we just made. So let's go to library, and we can go down to our materials here. There's our cracks. I'm going to pull out this graph, and here we have the 3 masks that we made. And we also have the various exposed parameters. Again, I have to go back and fix these groups because it doesn't understand that I was talking about the same thing clearly. This should be all in the same group. So I'm looking at my notes. I just want to make sure I set this up the way I had my notes set up. Otherwise, it will lead to much confusion down the road. I had cracks on this one. So this is where I'm going to put that height map. And I'm going to replace it. Oh, you know what? Let's turn these into black and white now. Because otherwise it won't work. So let's take the height. Or do it this way. Sometimes it doesn't want to play that way. You have to do it like that. And now we have, oops. Let's put a gradient map on that one. And now we have this. Oh, we have to up the output on this one because all of a sudden now we're playing with higher resolutions. So let's up that so we get the full effect. And here we go. We've replaced one of those colors with this, a little bit bigger, with the cracks. Well, it's only the height map right now. But you can see you've got that gray, lighter gray, and then the darker gray, and then the water. So it's working. It's a completely different setup proportionally than I had with the other one because the levels are different, so the shapes of the land masses are different. I think what I'm going to do during the break right now, just because it's kind of irritating, is I'm going to go through and make sure all these numbers match up, and then we will go over what those numbers are in the next video. But already you're beginning to see how this is going to apply. So we've replaced this one. Let's get rid of that. With something coming out of this material. We're going to make two more materials, and we're going to replace these guys. And then we're off to the races as far as making the rest of the material. This is going to get replaced with the water material that we made. And it's going to have some other stuff added onto it. But, you know, it's starting to take shape a little bit now. So I'll get the, I'll try to get them to look more like each other. And I'll get back to you with those numbers in the next video.